Utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is a teleological/consequentialist theory devised by Jeremy Bentham. This means that only the consequences matter, not the intentions, and good consequences equal a good moral action, whereas bad consequences equal a bad moral action. Bentham also devised the principle of utility, which is the greatest happiness principle. It is the greatest happiness, or pleasure, for the greatest number of people and the least amount of pain. Pleasure is measured quantitatively in head-ons. Utilitarianism follows hedonism, which is pleasure-seeking. It aims to seek pleasure and avoid pain. Happiness can be seen as pleasure. In Bentham's version of utilitarianism, no one's happiness is more important than others. Everyone's happiness is equal. And the least amount of pain and the most amount of pleasure makes for a good moral action. According to Bentham, consequences can be measured by using the hedonic calculus. This is priced. Purity, how free from pain it is. Remoteness, how close it is. Richness, how likely it is to lead to other pleasures. Intensity, how good the pleasure is. Certainty, how likely those consequences are to occur. Extent, who is affected. And duration, how long it lasts. John Stuart Mill. John Stuart Mill made a development to this theory by stating not all pleasures are equal. There are higher and lower pleasures. So some pleasures are worth more than others, and the higher pleasures are more worthwhile. A lower pleasure is a pleasure of the body, for example eating, whereas a higher pleasure is a pleasure of the mind, which is intellectual, such as reading. Only someone who's experienced both can decide which are higher and which are lower. John Stuart Mill was also a weak rule utilitarian. Rules and social constructs can be established and followed if they generally produce the greatest happiness. For example, with murder, it generally produces the most pain and the least amount of happiness, so the rule can be devised, do not murder. Some examples of what utilitarianism can be applied to are save your siblings, such as the case as Max and Megan Matthews. And Megan Matthews had a rare blood disease, so Max donated blood from his umbilical cord and bone marrow. Say that this causes the greatest good for the greatest number because it provides the family with a new child, it saves the life of an existing child, and it causes the family great pleasure. Therefore, it's the right thing to do. It can also be applied to Special Bombing Mission 13, where an atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. Although this led to hundreds of thousands dying, it ended the long war, which potentially saved millions more lives. Therefore, dropping the bomb was the right thing to do. Some strengths of utilitarianism. Greatest good. It follows that the right course of action is the one that leads to the most happiness and the least harm. It makes sense. How can happiness be a bad thing? It's secular. It doesn't rely on specific beliefs about God. As we live in a modern, multicultural society with a range of beliefs and a growing number of atheists, this makes it a more useful theory because it can apply to everyone. It's also easy to use. We can all weigh up the positives and negatives. It's straightforward, so anyone can apply the principle of utility. It's also objective, as positive and negative consequences of our actions can be measured. This makes it an objective, independent way of deciding what is right or wrong. Weaknesses of utilitarianism. It's unpredictable because we can't actually know what consequences will come about, so it's wrong to base our ethical choices on what may or may not happen. It's also incalculable. The amount of potential consequences there could be for even the smallest of our actions are so vast we can't possibly calculate all of them. It's also unjust because utilitarianism allows us to sacrifice individuals for the greater good, which is unfair. It allows for the tyranny of the majority, such as if most people feel strongly against homosexuality, this would justify laws against practicing homosexuality, which is confusing what is popular with what is right. It's also subjective because everyone has a different definition of happiness. Whose happiness should we protect?